Hi, this is Jonathan Rosenhead, Jerusalem psychotherapist. This week's Torah and Psychology post of Shelach is going to discuss groupthink. Groupthink is a phrase coined by Irving Janis to describe the phenomenon of when a group makes a decision which leads to a rash and incorrect decision. And this is often due to the fact that there's a sense of conformity within the group and that an opposing voice is not allowed, that nobody is allowed to raise a dissenting voice. And we often see groupthink in situations of high pressure, when a decision needs to be made, and an important decision needs to be made, and it needs to be made quickly. And therefore, this sense of conformity, and that nobody can disagree, leads to this incorrect and quick decision. And that even if there are people that disagree, and they personally feel that the decision is wrong, they go along with the flow, they get caught up with this phenomenon of groupthink to agree with what the group is saying, and they make this decision. And what we see in groupthink is often that the people in the group are actually on a similar level. They have similar characteristics, and therefore there's a uniformity within the group that lends itself to this conformity. And therefore we see in the end is that this leads to groupthink. So let's see how this relates to the Meraglim. We're told in the beginning of this week's parasha, Shelach lecha anashim, that you should send for yourself men. And Rashi explains that that Hashem didn't really think that there was a need to send Meraglim, but he acquiesced to the request of the Bnei Yisrael to send Meraglim into Eretz Canaan. So we already see from the beginning that there's this sense of negativity. There's a cloud of negativity over this mission to send in the Meraglim to spy out the land. And we also told the Meraglim, Kulam Anashim Rashi Bnei Yisrael, that they're all heads of their tribes, that they're all on a similar high level in the hierarchy, that they were all heads of their tribes. So we see that there's a uniformity within the Meraglim. So we can see already that this mission to send Meraglim had the hallmarks of groupthink. And it's also interesting that the Bnei Yisrael were supposed to just go into Eretz Yisrael. They were supposed to just inherit the land and take over and live there. But by sending in Meraglim, it changed the dynamics, and it changed the perspective of going into Eretz Yisrael, because it now turned it into a military operation, that the Bnei Yisrael asked to send in Meraglim. The Meraglim went in to spy out the land, to see what the land was like, to see whether they could go in, whether they could defeat the people in Eretz Canaan. So it changed it into a military campaign, and therefore it created a sense of high pressure. The pressure of spying out the land, the pressure of seeing whether they really could conquer this land and defeat the enemy, created this high pressure. So we see the Meraglim and the mission of the Meraglim created a sense and created this phenomenon of groupthink, and that can explain subsequently why the Meraglim came back with this negative decision, this negative and evil report, and why Shua and Kalev were the only ones that were able to raise a dissenting voice. They were seen as going against the group. And why the whole of Bnei Yisrael were punished, because in a sense, this groupthink was the groupthink of the whole of Bnei Yisrael. They wanted to send in Meraglim. And that's why we can say the Pasuk says that Hashem states that anybody above 20 years old will be punished. Anyone above 20 years old would be killed off in the Midbar, and only the children under 20 years old would eventually be able to go into Eretz Yisrael. So we see that as a result of this groupthink, it had drastic connotations. We can relate this to the repercussions of Tisha B'Av, as we explained that Bnei Yisrael cried, and that we cry for generations of the Beis Hamikdash being destroyed, but also the repercussions of the whole of the Bnei Yisrael, that anybody above 20 years old was seen as being caught up in this groupthink. And the Griz quotes the Medrash based on this pasuk of anybody above 20 years old would be punished, and says anyone above 20 years old, whether they were part of the group or not, would not go into Eretz Yisrael. Anyone above 20 years old that did not yet have signs of physical maturity, whether they were in the group or not, would not be punished. And anybody under 20 years old, this is the interesting bit, anybody under 20 years old that was considered a child but had physical signs of maturity, and therefore was halachically was seen as being a Baal Das, someone that had an opinion, if they were part of the Eitzah, if they were part of the consultation, part of the group of this decision, they would be punished. They would not be allowed to go into Eretz Yisrael, unlike what the Pasuk states. And therefore we see that this punishment of anybody under 20 years old but had physical signs of maturity, they were part of groupthink. They had an opinion. They were a Baal Das. They could have raised a dissenting voice. They could have said, no, this is not right. But they didn't. And therefore, even though they were under 20 years old, they were still seen as being part of groupthink, and therefore they were also punished. Have a great Shabbos and keep well.